I guess it's time to get going. Um, we've lots to discuss, and as usual, uh, but Norway has apparently, for a top story, banned car sales in 2025. But trends point towards 100% electric vehicle sales as early as April. So that seems to be very exciting. Technology. General Motors has introduced a new software platform, Altifi, as they shift their business model. And says, Richard, are they trying to compete with Amazon? General Motors has now invested $300 million in China's self-driving car company, Momenta. In environment and all that stuff, the question is, can we suck up enough carbon dioxide to cool the planet? In materials, here's a printing method that eliminates the need for harmful dyes and pigments.
It's not graphene.
Come on. And in space, there's a planet that's found orbiting three stars all at once. In biology, forests apparently are wired for wisdom. Trees apparently communicate with each other, and the forest is a single organism wired for wisdom and care. Interesting. For us humans, what we do and don't know about kindness. Apparently, it's very good. And in health, medicine, scientists are working on a toilet that identifies you by your butthole. Oh, that's what we'll discuss today. So now, Richard, what's this in our top story? That Norway bans gas car sales in 2025, but they're going to get electric vehicle sales much, much earlier.
Now, Norway is, at this point, a leader in the conversion to electric vehicles, and uh, gasoline shares of new car sales have been dropping consistently and look like they are dropping fast enough that 3 years before the country has officially banned sales of gas engines, it looks like the market is gonna take the demand away. Now, Norway has, when they're measuring this, they are measuring it in a way that's a little funny because they are including conventional hybrids as electric vehicles. So this is not going to 100% EVs the way we would think about it, but it shows the tremendous transition that is going to be happening everywhere around the world. Norway is just the leader of it now. This has been encouraged by government incentives to buy electric vehicles, so the government has played a part in it. And I think we're going to see in Norway some of the early examples of what happens to the conventional infrastructure for internal combustion engines when this conversion happens. There certainly are lots of questions. One of them is about gas supplies and prices. What's it going to be like for the existing population of cars in Norway buying gas in the future? Is gas going to be less available and more expensive? We will find out. Also, what happens to the gas stations? And what happens to people like auto mechanics? So there are significant questions about jobs and the new shape of the workforce with the electric vehicles as predominant. There also are questions about taxes. What do they do to replace the tax revenue from gas taxes? And so in Norway, we're going to see the first example of a country that is seeing this change and starting to deal with the effects of this change. So I think we ought to be paying attention and just seeing how it's going. We'll be next.
Any thoughts?
It's very interesting. Norway gets most of the income from oil in the North Sea, and yet,
Yes.
they're doing this, which is admirable. The other thing is that the 10% combustion cars that might still be there in April of next year, those are hybrids, and they only use about half as much gas as a regular combustion car.
Yeah, now they're not getting rid of all the cars in the market, so there are still lots of gas powered cars besides the hybrids that are old ones that they will have to retire. So it'll be uh, a mixed environment for the next few years.
It's interesting that Norway's electricity is mostly generated from hydroelectric
Uh
plants.
huh.
And I built offshore oil platforms off Norway, and the government requires us to consider the use of onshore hydropower at these offshore plants. So we had to evaluate the cost of
Wow.
running subsea power lines from the shore out to these platforms 100 miles offshore, uh,
Wow.
and show that it was more economic to generate the power on the platforms than it was to use hydropower from shore.
Uh huh. Interesting. And as Johannes said, the fact that Norway is such a big world supplier of oil makes it even more interesting that they're making this transition so fast.
Yeah, they're just doing the right thing, and we should be buying sort of responsible oil from Norway and
Uh huh.
Canada and so on instead of buying it from Saudi Arabia and
Right.
the Middle East. But
Yes.
it's the way it goes.
Richard, what's this about Motors shifting their business model?
Well, I have related to that two stories in a row about GM becoming a technical wonder, a software wonder. And if I look like I'm grinning when I talk about it, it's because uh, there are many companies that I know of that have tried to change their nature and to change from a metal bending, drilling gas engine technology to computer software giant is an enormous change, and I suspect bigger than most people at GM have any idea. But other than that, it's they have to do something since their conventional market is dying, and if they don't do something, they'll be out of business in 10 years. So the first thing they're doing, which actually seems interesting to me, is they're trying to expand into being a software company, and they now are introducing a new software platform that is called Altifi, and I have no idea how they got that name. It sounds to me like the name that came from some committee. But anyway, so Altifi they're gonna start introducing it in the 2023 model year on some gas engine cars and some electric cars. And GM says, quote, today cars are enabled by software. With Altifi, cars will be defined by software. And so this new business model extends beyond the hardware of building cars. And what they're going to do is they're going to become a software platform innovator. And the software platform, to think about it in a model, think about Google making uh, the Android operating systems for the phone. This is the equivalent of the Android operating system, but it's for cars, not phones. And when you have this operating system that is a known environment, then it is much easier for programmers to write code. And what they're also going to do is to open it up to third party applications like they have on the iPhone, and you can upload to your car and get your latest features in your car without buying a new car. So they think that this is going to be a game changer. The fact that Tesla already has updates of their software without the user's intervention, they probably noticed that, and the fact that they are doing the same thing doesn't mean they're imitating them. It was just a good idea. Anyway, and they're somehow, they think they're going to be able to sell this software as a monthly service so that you will pay, I don't know, $19 or $99 or something to have your car connected to their subscriber service that is going to take care of your car. It's going to do some neat things, they say, like they'll have cameras so they can identify who is getting into the car. They can adjust the seats for you. They can turn on the car. You don't need a key because they recognize who you are. They can tell if you have a child in the back seat and if the seat belt is attached, so they could do a lot better job of being the automotive nanny. And they think people are going to pay for this. I am not sure about it myself, but it's their grand idea. And they will even say they will connect to the weather forecasts, and if it's going to be raining, even if your car is parked and turned off, they'll roll your windows up for you. Oh boy, I'm not sure how much a month I would pay for that, but it all depends on the applications. They somehow think that this operating system will extend to things you can use in your home. I haven't seen any specific plans for that yet. Maybe they will have a home robot running on the operating system. I don't know. It is their plans. Hearing their plans does not make me want to rush out and buy more GM stock, though. So that's the first part of GM and technology. Let me get the next part and then we'll open it up for discussion. The next part is have you ever heard of the Chinese self-driving car company Momenta? Raise your hand if you have. Uh, the reason why you probably haven't heard of it is they have not yet actually made a car. But they're going to be big. They're going to be big. The GM thinks they're going to be big, and in China they're focusing not just on EVs but autonomous driving vehicles, and GM is trying to leapfrog their way into that technology by buying a $300 million investment in this car company that has not even made one car yet. And they think it's going to speed up the development of their next generation of self driving technologies. And GM is making a hard push into these areas of new technologies. As one example that I didn't realize, they have partnered with Microsoft in the hopes of somehow accelerating the rollout of electric self-driving cars. So GM is busy trying to make a future, and we can see big portions of their plan, and I wish them luck. At least they're knowing they have to do something, but the transition that they are trying to make is incredibly difficult.
Any thoughts?
Does anybody plan to, I hope my sound isn't too loud, I'll put up it is, but does anybody plan to retrofit cars that are not self-driving with equipment that would make them self-driving?
There are some firms that are selling kind of conversion kits that have different sensors and computers you can strap on your car. That is not a very active segment, though.
Because we're going to be 10 years introducing self-drive cars, well, there is still owner-driven cars on the road.
The add-on, I think the add-on kit is where they're doing most successfully are for long-distance trucks. So that's a fairly active segment now.
Does my sound okay?
It's loud still.
Yeah, all right.
So turn your mic off, please. Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to make a point. I do a lot of walking, and I've been watching construction sites, and they have a model now which is a lot like the GM model, but let me explain it, and we can compare and contrast, because the model they're using is going gangbusters. A lot of the construction depends on new pieces of technology. For instance, if you're putting up a 50-floor building, you have to put great big wide anchors into the ground, and they have to be able to hold the entire building from sinking. And to do this, the thing has to drill, it has to drill wide, and it can't turn against the big high crane that's holding it, and it's holding it on a bunch of ropes. So it's a really tricky process, very high tech, and you have to have sensors while you're doing it so that you're not losing traction from going too fast or going to stall from going too slow. So equipment companies buy these things use them for a while, and then get the next and best idea.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they can do this is that they studied this ground. They had their own engineers, and often the engineers go on the site and help them. And they can provide a service which no one construction company can provide for all the other things in this new magic universe. There's ways, for instance, to install the electricity just at the right time and everything like this, which saves lots of money. So the construction company is what the GM wants the consumer to be. Good luck for you. The consumer will put up with the baby rolling around in the back seat and, fix it with a newspaper. Some of them. It's just not going to work because the consumer isn't paying a whole lot of money doing something where they know paying money to the specialist is needed. But for the GM to expect consumers to spend 50 cents a week to open windows and so forth, most consumers will say, I can open the window when I'm in it, and I won't leave the window open when I leave, even if I do. It's just not a viable market from an economic point of view.
Uh-huh. Anyway, that's what I was saying. For me, it's about the applications.
Yeah. The applications is a great idea, but you got to sell it to the car makers,
Right.
not the rest of them.
Anyway, it still is a sign of the enormous change that we have undertaken, and there are some forecasts now that say, in terms of electric vehicles, we have passed the tipping point where the change is inevitable.
So, Richard, are you going to get all these services in your Lamborghini?
No, she's kidding about the Lamborghini because that's what we talk about at home so that Alexa can listen to us, and we're just waiting to see the Lamborghini commercials on YouTube, but we haven't seen them yet. I suspect that none of these will be implemented on my several-year-old Honda Fit.
For our next story on the environment, Richard's a bit dubious about whether we can stop emissions fast enough, and then asks, can we suck up enough carbon dioxide, sucking it up to cool the planet as much as we need to? Richard, tell us about it.
Well, again, the first part of it, when we started these hot science sessions several years ago, I believe that we were going to be able to deal with reducing emissions fast enough to stave off the worst disaster. And I really don't feel like that nearly as much as I did several years ago. And one of the reasons why is that governments are the commitments they're making to change so far are not enough to stop disaster, and the governments are not even meeting their inadequate commitments. Again, so far. Maybe it will change, and maybe the governments of the world will be wonderful starting tomorrow. They will hear our call for action and just take care of it. Maybe that's the case, but maybe not. And so one of the things that has happened is now the world's biggest carbon capture plant has opened up in Iceland, and it'll pump about 4,000 tons of captured CO2 underground each year. Now that sounds like a lot until you consider that presently we're putting 40 billion tons of CO2 in the air each year. So what we're doing is just a tiny, tiny fraction of what is needed. But this is the first, and if you look at any of the technology curves, like for example the curves of solar power or the curves of electric vehicles, you see that the rates of these things increase drastically and the cost of them decreases drastically. And the people who understand what's happening with carbon capture thinks that this is the same case. So the company now that is doing it is saying they are now able to do it for between $600 and $1,000 per metric ton of CO2 taken out of the atmosphere. That's a lot. They think their technology that they will be able to improve it to the point where the cost is less than $100 per ton. That's still a lot. But if they're able to do that, then with their own processes, they will have been able to decrease the cost by a factor of 10 from what it was when they started to operate. And they believe that this carbon capturing is going to continue to increase and the costs are going to continue to decrease. He thinks that what we're really talking about is that the CO2 removal business is going to become a giant industry and that it's going to be bigger than the oil industry, and it'll be an industry that generates $1 trillion a year, and that it's going to be driven by the need to get it out of the atmosphere and the significant decreasing costs that they think are going to happen. Now, there's still a lot of questions. One of this is if you're taking it out of the air, what in the heck do you do with it? And there are some ideas that are putting it underground. There are other ideas about combining it with some hydrogen and making carbon neutral fuel. There are other ideas about if we're taking all of this carbon out of the atmosphere each year, then we now have a wonderful source for carbon. And what can we do with this? And there are many ideas of what they can do with it. For example, making these carbon nanotubes. If you put a bunch of them together, you can make a cable stronger than steel and use it to make new technologies for building bridges and in the buildings that Roger sees going up when he walks around. So maybe there are other sources for things that we can do with the carbon. And when we have a lot of carbon available, we'll have the incentive to figure it out. So these particular people who are the ones actually presently involved in carbon capture are really enthusiastic about the prospects, and they say this is going to be an enormous industry, and the industry has the advantage of all of this free material, which is all this carbon that we have put in our atmosphere in the last 150 years. I don't know what the economy will do when we run out of that carbon. We'll have to go through another change, but that's for the future.
Any thoughts?
Well, one of the things that these guys do with their wishful thinking is they look at just a small part of the overall process. And what they need to do is life cycle energy budgets. And the idea of capturing CO2 and making hydrogen to recombine with the CO2 and make fuels is really preposterous because it takes more energy to create the hydrogen or to recover the hydrogen from water or wherever than they're going to get out of the fuel. And there's a good book that Vaclav Smil has recently written called Numbers Don't Lie. And it talks about the time it takes to make these transitions from laboratory proof to commercial applications. And it's just so much wishful thinking, this stuff, but the way it goes.
Going back to the old-fashioned way of planting trees, there's a Canadian company called Flash Forest that want to use drones to be able to plant a large area of trees much more efficiently than planting a tree at a time.
A question that I would have related to what Andrew said is how much fossil fuels are used in this process of sucking up enough carbon dioxide. Some of the things I've read seem to think that they use an awful lot of fossil fuels and therefore emit an awful lot of carbon dioxide in the process that's trying to suck it up.
That's correct.
And also, the other thing that is a part of this is there still is immense scientific and technical change that is happening that is, while a lot of it is still in the research pipeline and not in production yet, that are going to change the dynamics. For example, electrolysis of water to get carbon out of it. There have been two developments in the last 3 months that I have read and reported about in the newsletter about new, very much more efficient kind of nano-electric catalyst to be able to run that same reaction and use very much less energy. And as you see these changes happen, one of the things that is common is to see these next generation technical developments move it to new levels that you didn't think were possible before. Again, as somebody who's been in a high-tech industry like the semiconductor industry, I saw a lot of that stuff happening around me in the 15 years I was in the business.
That's right. And if you look the way they did things 200 years ago, the way we do things now would be science fiction 200 years ago.
Right.
And so it's inevitable that there will be discoveries and changes come along. It's just that they won't come as fast as people would like to think they could.
I'd like to point out that the UN plans emphasize capturing carbon dioxide in agriculture and growing trees.
Right. And in the soil.
It's much better, according to them, because when you do it with agriculture, it becomes part of the substrate on which plant life depends. And it is also the product. Trees provide shade and make life in a lot of places more bearable than they are now. It's hard to live in the desert, but there's a great plan being re-energized right now to put a belt of forest across southern Africa to block the desert desertification at a
Desertification, yes.
fraction of the cost of these still speculative ideas.
Hmm.
Now, if we gave farmers, tree growers, and the rest of them a price on the carbon they sequester, which
Hmm.
can be judged by satellites, farmers in developed countries as well as farmers in not developed countries, and then insist that the dreamers incorporate that price into their plans, we will have a competitive price on all kinds of carbon removal, carbon
Hmm.
sequestering, which will stop a lot of the hype. This idea that governments go in and they say, we don't mind spending 40, they can work it on the bench a little bit longer. There's no rush to get it out in 10 years if you're pushing your farmers to do this and giving them, each of them, a bonus. The good thing about the bonus, it's one way to transfer painlessly and give people in Africa and
Hmm.
South America something productive to do, because
Now,
it's highly labor intensive. You can't fool around. I mean, you can
right.
mechanize it. We have mechanized farming, but the kind of thing you're doing with deserts, you got to go around trees every day or at certain
Hmm.
periods and water them by hand.
Well, I
And
think,
that,
certainly, the problem is severe enough that I think we need to be doing everything that we can and doing what we can using the systems of dirt and earth on the planet is a great idea. One of the things I've talked about again and again is regenerative agriculture, which in the U.S. is one of the leading ways that they have of working to put carbon into the soil instead of taking out of it. Anyway, we need to do what we can. You're exactly right, Roger.
And Richard, in terms of printing, what's this new method that eliminates the need for harmful dyes and pigments?
Well, I think it's kind of cool. Researchers from the Chinese Academy of Science are trying to deal with printer ink. And if you have an inkjet printer, that it takes a lot of ink and a lot of plastic cartridges, and when you're through with all of that stuff, you just throw it away. So it's absolutely not a sustainable process. And so uh, these Chinese researchers think that they have a solution for that. And oddly enough, their solution to being able to print brilliant colors is to use transparent ink. Why didn't I think of that? And the way that this what they will do with the transparent ink uh, is inspired by creatures like butterflies and peacocks. We have lots of brilliant colors from those critters, but the colors are not from pigments. The colors are made using light manipulation and reflection through microscopic structures to produce the vibrant colors. So the Chinese printer will drop down tiny thousands of tiny little domes, and I'm not sure how they get the colors. If they get the colors by the patterns of the domes, or if they're going to hit the domes with lasers or something. I don't understand how that part of it works, but they're going to get vibrant colors that actually last better than the present systems. They won't fade with age and sun, and they will be using structural color instead of pigment color. So they think this will make your printer easier. You're just going to have one cartridge, and I bet you still have to throw it away when you're through. But
In a box.
Yes. I found a picture that illustrates what you're talking about. I don't know if you can see it. The little domes, the
yes,
size of the dome determines the color. And as you said, Richard, it's a structural process. And the butterfly wings also have like a structure that breaks up the light to create these different colors.
yes. And so they look like they're creating them by not only the pattern of the little dots, but the size and shape of the little dots.
Exactly. And the holes, they're down to a fraction of a micron in size.
Right,
So
they're,
it's
yes.
small.
So the jet on the printer has to be small. Thank you for the picture drawing.
I've just got a big cartridge for my printer delivered, and they give you a sticker that you put on it, and you call UPS, they come and pick it up.
Wow.
And then I know in Akahika Ink Place downtown I can't remember the name right now. Anyway, you can bring them there too.
Right, right. You know, I've tried in Ahiek, there is a place that refills cartridge, and I've tried that hoping to have some solution that's better than buying new printers, but I had problems with about 1 in 3 didn't work.
Yeah, that happened to me too.
And so it made me stop trying to do that because I do a lot of printing and I needed the whole system to be reliable.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, why do you find it fascinating that you found a planet that orbits 3 stars all at once?
Well, the first part of it is they, the astronomers have what they call the three body problem, which is trying to figure out how in the heck do you get 3 bodies to orbit around each other and to make a stable system. And they thought that that was such a complex problem that they did not expect to find planets in these 3 star systems. But then, now with recent work, they found in our neighborhood, just a mere 1,300 light years away, they found a multiple triple star system that had the orbital protoplanetary rings around them that will form planets, and they say now there must be planets there, and so somehow the planet is establishing, at least, I don't know how stable the orbit is, but it has to be at least repeating so the planet doesn't fall into one of the stars it's going around. And I'm still trying to visualize the orbit of this planet and can't quite do it. And anyway, so now they have found for the first time a planet's in orbit around a 3 star system. And they actually think that it's in a common configuration, and they're going to find them again and again. And this part of the problem is with the range of size of stars. The stars range from as little as 7.5% of the mass of our sun. That's very small, to hundreds of times bigger than the stars. And the smaller stars are redder, cooler, longer living. And the bigger stars are bluer and hotter and have a shorter lifetime. And the Earth actually this is a case where our sun is not a typical sun because about 80% of all stars are red dwarfs, smaller than our sun, and only about 5% of the stars are bigger than our sun. So there's this enormous variation in the size of stars, and uh, they're just now, it's only 30 years ago that they were able, with the telescopes, to be able to identify planets around stars. And what they have found now is they commonly find planets around binary stars where there are two suns, and these binary stars uh, show up fairly commonly. Trinary stars occur only in about 1 in 10 star systems are trinary stars. 1 in 3 are binary stars. There are even more stars in some systems. Some of them have 4 or 5 or even more stars all orbited around each other. And what they're finding is planets in more of these places, and at one level it is, I think, just more opportunities for strange circumstances. And we know that sometimes in these strange circumstances funny things happen, like we get to have life and intelligent people, and then old people uh, talking to each other over Zoom.
Any thoughts?
Okay, no real mad sci-fi fans here other than me.
Okay, Richard, what's this in biology about forests being wired for wisdom?
Well, I think actually, as I read through these, this story I think is maybe more significant than any of the others this week. And the heart of this story is a woman, Suzanne Simard, and she's a forest ecologist. And you may have heard about her. She's written some books that have gotten some publicity in the last few years. And after her spending her professional career studying forests, she says some interesting things. One of the things is that a forest is a single organism. And she found that the processes that make for a high functioning forest mirror the maps of the human brains that we're now starting to understand. And based on her research, she is now coming back to ideas that were held by Aboriginal people, and she calls the mature hub trees in the forest mother trees, and has evidence of them parenting, eldering, sharing, and having mutual and reciprocal relations with the other trees around her. And that the basis of her work is interesting. Uh, she's been interested in trees all of her life, and when she started this study, what she started to study was below ground, not the trees, but the grounds that the trees grew on. And what she saw in forests was the below ground world is this complex environment that supports the whole process with the bacteria and the fungi and the archaea. They're the ones that are cycling the carbon that Roger wants to get rid of. It's these critters in the ground that actually do the job, decomposing things and cycling nitrogen and filtering water and building soil and structure. And so she spent a lot of time studying bacteria, and or this soil rather, and fungi, and as she was studying the fungi, she found 100 different varieties of fungus in the soil, and what she found in studying it further was interesting, and that is there were two species of the fungi that were closely related that were in the root structures of all of the trees and look like they're connecting and exchanging things between the trees through this fungus system. And to try to understand what was really going on, she did an interesting experiment. She would put a tree in a bag, put radioactive carbon, for example, in the bag for a couple of hours, take the bag off, and then a week later come around with a Geiger counter. And where she had irradiated that one tree, the Geiger counter went crazy. And when she went over to the tree that was next to it, the Geiger counter also started getting a lot of reaction. And this was proof that the carbon that she fed to one tree was being transported to the next tree over. Our friends, these fungus, were very much involved with that transport. She found out as she studied it further that it wasn't just carbon, it was carbon and nitrogen and water. And then she also found within the kind of transport mechanism of the tree, she found interesting chemicals that are like biochemicals that have the same structure as the neurotransmitters in the human brain, and they are there in the roots of the trees. And so she is understanding these trees have different relations with each other and different dependencies on each other than we ever imagined. She was talking about, for example, mixed forests that they have in Canada that contain birch and Douglas fir and another kind of tree. The way the tree guys are growing trees is they view the birches as enemies to the forest because it's not productive wood, and what they do is they have a forestry practice that gets rid of all these nasty birch trees. We can't use them. She studied them and found that these trees have a reciprocal arrangement where they take care of each other, and these birch trees were required so the Douglas firs could be healthy. And so these trees contribute to each other. She also studied young trees, and young trees grow under old trees, and it turns out old trees have this established root system and nutrient system and everything else. And one of the things she found out that is pretty amazing is when the young tree grows, it takes it a couple of months before its root section connects with the trees, the root system of the mother tree. And after that happens, the mother tree sends carbon and nitrogen and nutrients to the young trees, and the young trees are able to survive in an environment where it's kind of dark and they don't have enough sunlight to be able to thrive under their natural processes, but they are able to thrive because of the care and material support that the mother trees provide the other trees. And she's gone on from this study of trees and the ecosystem of trees to really start to theorize differently about things like evolution. We had Darwin with the survival of the fittest as what is driving evolution. And she says what is driving evolution actually is the ability of all of these entities to work together and to be able to create a whole environment where things are able to thrive. So it's not survival of the fittest, but it's survival and prospering of those things that can thrive. And she certainly observes the way it is for trees, it is also that way for humans. We have made all the progress we have made not because of our ability to outcompete with all the other guys, but rather our ability to cooperate and support one another so that we all thrive. And like the trees can do it, so can we.
Any thoughts?
In a way, the trees, it's like a socialist system where everybody helps everybody.
That's right. These socialist trees, don't call them that, or we'll have the political right trying to ban birch trees.
Or chop them down.
You know, it's interesting. Darwin did not really say survival of the fittest. He said survival of the most adaptable.
Right.
And it was Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, who coined the survival of the fittest phrase, thinking that was easier for people to understand.
Okay. Interesting.
Survival of the most adaptable, that's evolution.
Okay.
Yeah. I once planted about 50 small trees amongst much larger trees, and they didn't die, but they didn't grow. I could still go back to that house, and although they've survived, they've not grown.
Well, you needed a richer ecosystem for those trees, and you needed to put some good fungi in the soil.
Yeah. Well, people warned me that they wouldn't grow, but I went ahead and tried it anyway.
I was really glad to tell this story because it validates something that I read about a year or so ago. And that was a book by Hope Jahren, Jahren, who's also a biologist who's been at Georgia Tech and Berkeley and Hawaii and is now in Norway. And she wrote an autobiography, a memoir. And one chapter was how she was learning and making her way through academia, which is not easy. And the next chapter was always about a tree and the forest. And it really talked about the growth and development of both beings there. And in the chapters about about the trees growth, she definitely did talk about communication between trees and about the way that was done with the fungi and so on. Not as many details as we've heard today, but it was really a beginning, so that it was really nice to be able to see this with the work having been taken further.
Yes, and this work I think is pretty groundbreaking because it is really expands our idea and understanding of these other organisms that we're sharing the planet with. And
I've we've had a cottage for more than 30 years, and the I followed what happens to the trees with the cottage, because right now a bunch of very tall straight pine trees are breaking through the canopy of smaller kinds of trees like birch trees and smaller evergreens. The smaller evergreens are dying because they do not get enough light, and they fall down in storms and litter the ground. And for a while, they're a great fire hazard. But in surprisingly few years, and I'm talking, roughly estimating 5, they rot and they don't burn. And in the end, I think we'll have giant trees, and they will dominate for quite some time, and then they'll begin to fall down, and the whole thing will start again. Mm-hmm. The smaller trees will grow up. The other thing is, and we recently cleared a lot of the area, and it's become a deer meadow. Mm-hmm. Because very few trees want to grow there. The grass smothers them, smothers the seeds. And sure enough, we get deer and everything around these open areas. But that too will changes over time. There's a regular progression, which environmentalists could take advantage of.
Richard, if we know that trees can be quite kind, what about us? What is it about us? What do we know and don't know about kindness?
Well, kindness is getting big. In recent years, psychologists have gained more understanding about human kindness and its benefits. It used to be that it was not of much interest to psychologists and people like this. That if you look in the 1980s, in that decade, there were only 35 papers published in the psychology journals about kindness. And in the last decade, there were more than 1,000. So there is much more interest in kindness, and we know things about kindness now that is pretty clear from a number of psychological studies. The first thing that we know for sure is that kindness makes us, the person who is being kind, feel good. And they have done different tests. For example, they had groups of people and they gave them some money and gave them different choices about what to do with the money. And one of the things they could do is buy something for themselves, or another thing they could do is to give it to somebody else. And what they found studying these is they found out that the people who took the money and used it for somebody else instead of themselves felt significantly higher than those who treated themselves with the money. And neuroscience has been able to confirm this, and what they see with people who are exhibiting this kindness is the release of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter for being happy and feeling good. And so they're actually able to see the biochemical reaction to kindness in the brain. Now, another thing about kindness is contagious. So kind acts can have a ripple effects, and they have done a number of studies that found that people who are shown kindness pay it forward. That is, they exhibit more kindness to other people. So when you're kind to somebody, the odds go up that that person will be kind then to somebody else and pay that forward. Also, they found that kindness can make a person feel less anxious. They did studies with people who experience social anxiety, and they asked them to perform acts of kindness for a few weeks, like cleaning up after your roommate in college. And what they found was that after this time, these people who had experienced social anxiety to begin with, their social anxiety went way down and their desire to avoid social situations was reduced. So they're doing acts of kindness towards other people then made it them feel freer about reaching out to other people. And about kindness, even toddlers can be kind, so it's real deep in our roots. As an example, they had a researcher who was hanging up washing, and they had toddlers near them, and the toddler would discover something in a box, and maybe it was going to be a marble or another clothespin to hang up clothes. And what they found was that these toddlers were just as delighted as they found a clothespin that they could give to the researcher as they were in finding a marble for themselves. So here they were able to demonstrate that these toddlers, 2-year-olds, are already wired so that they are motivated to act with kindness at least some of the time. And though they haven't done the brain studies of them yet, I'm sure that these acts of kindness generate dopamine, and which is the brain's own reward system. So, one way to look at this is scientists have studied kindness and they found conclusive evidence that it is the giver that should be grateful because the kindness benefits them directly.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I find it fascinating that archaeologists have found human remains from the time when we used to be hunter-gatherers of people who have recovered from a broken femur. So in those days, they would have had to be carried about months in order to recover from a broken femur. They couldn't contribute much to the hunting, maybe a bit to the gathering. But it tells me that we've been a kind species for a long time.
Well then, Richard, if we want to move on to our question, what's this about a toilet that they're working on that identifies you by your butthole Why is that? Why do they do it? What's going on? And why is that useful?
Well, it's kind of like facial recognition, but on the nether end. And so researchers want to give your toilet a smart makeover, and uh, they are developing a scanner that can recognize each person's unique, quote, anal print. And they do it with cameras that are installed inside your toilet bowl and that use AI to then be able to match stool samples to the specific user whose butt they recognize and then track medical data and even calculate the flow rate and volume of urine. And so they're able to, besides recognizing who is sitting on the pot, they're able to then provide measurements of health monitors and use this as a basis for care of the people. And as an example of this, there is a company that has introduced a product called TrueLoo, and the TrueLoo is a smart toilet seat that collects even more biometrics. For example, once it has identified you when you sit on the toilet, it collects information about your weight. It analyzes your stool samples using optical methods, looking at volume, clarity, consistency, and color. Then, of course, tracks your urine flow. It doesn't say it here, but I'm sure it's the case that they have built-in metrics that I've heard about from Japanese smart toilets, where they're also making sure that you show up on the toilet every day at your regular time, and if they don't show up on time, they send somebody an alert because they figured that you might have fallen or something like this. And so, anyway, so with this camera, they're able to understand when somebody has abnormal patterns, either in their behavior or in their medical testing data, and this can help treatment in a variety of conditions. I'm sure they will program it for some of the conditions for it to send an email right away to your doctor because it's a problem. Uh, One of the issues with this advanced use of this technology is where does the data go? Because it turns out this information about me and my stool and urine samples gives a lot of personal information and intimate health details. And one concern, for example, is what if the insurance companies hear about this? Is my insurance rate going to go up because my Snoopy toilet caught me doing something bad? What about the people who are using drugs? What can the police find out about me from the TrueLoo data that they also are collecting? And once you are starting to measure something that is of the body, then this kind of crosses a line into privacy issues, and as a society, we haven't really figured out how to be able to deal with that yet. But here is another technical product that is going to make us think about things that we don't want to think about. I, for example, want to know what they do with the photos. I don't want to have my TrueLoo butt print pasted all over the internet.
Any thoughts?
Now, come on, I knew you guys would have some reaction to the Trulu. I'm just waiting.
This is an idea that is a really good idea that is just suffering from over commercialization dreams.
Uh-huh.
Because I think this is something that really should be marketed, developed and marketed as a medical device that would be in every medical office so that, you know, when you go to the doctor, you know, you go to the bathroom as well, okay? And, you know, they collect this data and it stays in your medical record. And over a period of time, you know, they'll see differences and stuff like that and all that. But to, you know, they say in order to get enough people, you know, they want to get a lot of people to buy it so they can make a lot of money. It doesn't need to be in every home, you know. You don't
But
need
if it's in your home, then it's monitoring you directly. And, you know, we have people wearing the Fitbits who are keeping track of their heart rate every minute of the day. And this medical monitoring business is getting a lot bigger as more people get old and have money
yeah.
then and are concerned about their health, then this medical monitoring business is one that's going to get real big in the next few years.
I
Now,
think I'm lucky that I trust a doctor.
Richard, you know that with Fitbit, apparently at least 13 companies have access to everything on any of these Fitbits.
Uh-huh. I didn't realize that broad of access, but it doesn't surprise me, and certainly makes you wonder about, gee, can my healthcare provider get access too?
Yeah. Probably we've all given urine and stool samples at some time. It's only a kind of build on that.
I'd say a lot of information is needed occasionally for individuals, but also for research. To give you an example, there's a medical device, I'm not going to name it, but people who were using it were trained to use it properly, and it collected a fantastic amount of data.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're using the device, it's boiled down to three things you look after: how long, how often, and when. You don't have to know any more. And a lot of this crap is because so many people are impressed with the technology, it's easy to sell them information they don't need. They think it's in and that they're in control. You know, you should train yourself to know when you feel good and what changes. And you don't need a laboratory and 5 PhD doctors to advise you on it. If you feel good, you feel good.
That's right. You should just take my meditation course where I talk about interoception and train you to feel your body. But the problem with that approach is you actually have to work and do something.
Well, Richard, thanks a lot.
That's true, but
Fred,
okay.
Fred, can I ask?
Anyway.
I just got an email from LCS about mudslides and everything.
Yes.
In Heat and there's emergency and they're asking for help.
Yes.
Can I send that on to Richard and Fred, and you can send it out?
Sure, sure.
You probably have it anyway.
I didn't get it from LCS. I haven't looked this afternoon, though. Somebody else I know got one. I think somebody talked about it when the broadcast started.
Well, thanks a lot on that, Margot. And thanks, Richard, once again. And we'll see you all next week.
All right. See you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Adios.